Today, we're diving into one of the most ambitious national experiments in modern history, India's 60-year-long journey of trying to map out its own economic destiny through a series of 5-year plans.
I mean, think about it. It's a massive question, right? But back in the mid-20th century, for one brand new nation, this wasn't some thought experiment. It was the only question that mattered.
Just try to imagine the scene in 1947. You've got this new nation facing these enormous challenges. We're talking widespread poverty, crippling inflation, and not even enough food to go around. And this is all after 200 years of colonial rule. The slate wasn't just clean, it was scarred. And the challenge was to build a future on top of all that.
So, instead of just leaving it all to chance and hoping for the best, India's leaders chose a path of deliberate, conscious design. They decided they were going to plan their way to prosperity, one 5-year block at a time.
Okay, so first up, let's look at the grand plan itself. What does it even mean to plan an entire economy? And how did India set up the system to actually do it?
At its core, it's really all about making choices on purpose. Instead of a purely reactive economy that just kind of goes with the flow, planning is this thoughtful, controlled effort to steer a country's resources, its people, its money, its materials, towards specific goals you've decided on ahead of time.
And here's basically how they broke it down. It was a pretty logical, step-by-step process. First, you figure out your biggest problems. Then, you set some clear goals for both the short term and the long term. After that, you get specific. You fix concrete targets, like how many tons of steel or how many megawatts of power you need, and you figure out where to get the resources. And finally, you just do it. You execute the plan, and you're constantly checking in to make sure you're still on track.
Now, this wasn't just some idea floating around on paper. It became a real institution. The Planning Commission, with Prime Minister Nehru right at the helm, basically became the nerve center for India's entire economic development, the architect of the nation's future. All right, on to Section 2, building from scratch. So, with the system in place, the real work could begin. These first few decades were all about laying the absolute foundations of a modern nation.
You can see the strategy evolving right here on this timeline. The first plan in 51 starts with the most basic need there is, food. Then, you see this strategic pivot to factories and industry. But by 1966, you can also see the first signs of real trouble.
The first two plans tell this fascinating story of shifting priorities. The first plan was a huge success. It actually exceeded its growth target by focusing on agriculture to feed the nation. Then, for the second plan, the famous Mahalanobis plan, they did a complete 180. It poured resources into heavy industry. The idea was pretty radical. Let's build the machines that build other machines. That way we can create a self-sustaining industrial engine that would free India from depending on other countries.
But, this slide shows you how reality can just throw a wrench in the works. The third plan was aiming for a really ambitious 5.6% growth, but it got hit by a perfect storm, wars with China and Pakistan, and on top of that, a really bad drought. The result? A massive failure. Actual growth was only 2.8%, forcing the government to basically hit the pause button and declare plan holidays.
So after those early years and the crises that followed, the focus of the plans began to shift. It wasn't just about building dams and factories anymore. It was about trying to tackle the really deep-rooted social issue of poverty.
This right here became the defining slogan of the era, Garibi Hatao, which means the removal of poverty. For the very first time, with the fifth plan, tackling poverty wasn't just a side effect of growth. It became the main objective, a central pillar of the entire national strategy.
And this new focus, wow, it created some serious momentum. In fact, what came next was a hat trick of successes, 3 5-year plans in a row. The 5th, 6th, and 7th, all of them surpassed their growth targets. It was a period of real, sustained optimism.
But you know how these stories go. Just as one era of crisis led to a new focus, another one was right on the horizon. The early 1990s brought political instability and a huge economic crisis that would end up changing India's whole philosophy on planning forever.
By 1992, the country was facing some really serious problems. We're talking high inflation, massive budget deficits. The old state-controlled model was really struggling. It became clear that a radical change was needed to avoid a total disaster.
And boy, did that change deliver results. The 8th plan, which was the first one implemented after those 1992 economic reforms, didn't just meet its target, it completely shattered it. The goal was 5.6% growth. What they actually achieved was a remarkable 6.8%.
So how did this happen? Well, the strategy was a complete pivot. The plan actively encouraged the private sector to invest, it tackled those big fiscal problems head-on, and it unleashed high growth across key sectors. This was really the start of a whole new economic era for India.
Of course, all eras, no matter how successful, eventually come to an end. By the 21st century, the world was changing fast. In a more globalized, fast-paced economy, the very idea of a centralized, 5-year blueprint was starting to be challenged. The plan's final chapter was about to be written.
The final version, the 12th plan, ran from 2012 to 2017, and its theme really captured how India's ambitions had evolved. It wasn't just about growth anymore. It was about growth that was fast, but also sustainable for the planet and inclusive for every part of society.
And then, in 2015, the whole system got a major overhaul. The Planning Commission was replaced by this new thing called Niti Aayog, and the difference is pretty stark. The old Planning Commission was a top-down model. The central government made the plans and used its financial power to kind of impose them on the states. Niti Aayog is a whole new philosophy. It's a government think tank. It gives strategic advice and works with the states in a bottom-up approach to encourage what they call cooperative federalism. It's a move from being a controller to being a collaborator.
Which brings us to a final thought. For over 60 years, India's 5-year plans were this bold declaration that a nation could actually architect its own destiny. Now, the methods have changed, sure, but that impulse to plan for a better future, that remains. So it leaves us with a question. In a world that's facing climate change, pandemics, and all sorts of economic uncertainty, is the whole idea of a grand national plan a relic of the past, or is it an idea whose time has come again?